Okay. Very good afternoon to you all. Thank you very much for attending this talk on a Saturday. Saturday is a very precious time. So the fact that you have prioritized this, shows that you have great curiosity on this topic. So I hope that I will be able to satisfy that curiosity and open up new ways of looking at the Indian story in Singapore, both its history as well as its impact. Okay. Now, before I'll first do a snapshot of the Indian community, and then I'll tell you how I'll go about this talk. Okay. Now, the Indian community is about 8% of the population of Singapore. It's very small, but extremely complex, way more complex than the Chinese or Malay. Okay. Now, firstly, the resident population is 348,000 people. The migrant population is about 400,000. So 1/3 of all foreign workers are from the subcontinent. So when I say Indians, I'm using in the same way that the British would have used it, the subcontinent. So Pakistan, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka included. And we also have Indians, who have settled in Burma and Malaysia who are coming here. Okay. So now religion, every religion that's in our interreligious organization is represented here. We have Hindus, 57%, Muslims are 23%, Christian 13%, Sikhs 3%, and the Jains and Zoroastrians, they're even Buddhists, the Tibetans are Buddhists. Okay. The ethnic groups, okay, Tamil is 54%. So Singapore Indians always think, oh, India is, Tamil, which sometimes for someone from India is a bit annoying because India has so much more, so Tamils are, but we are the predominant group here. And then there are Malayalis are 8%, Hindi speakers 5%, Punjabis 5%, and all the others. Now, ethnic and sub-ethnic groups, there are about 30 of them. That means sub-religion, sub-caste, okay? Now, employment pass holders, which has grabbed a lot of attention recently, there are 46,000 of them, or 26% of all EPs in Singapore are Indians, okay? So this makes, and I'm not including Pakistan, Sri Lanka, so with that, maybe 30%. So this makes them the largest groups of EPs. So naturally, you can see when right now with so much foreign talent coming to Singapore and Singaporeans having job insecurity, the most highlighted group among the EPs would be the largest one, which is the Indians. Okay, and at the end, I will touch on that. Okay, so what are these Indians doing? Unlike in the past, where it was more labor and trade, now it's a lot more professionals, IT professionals, engineers, bankers, professors, scientists. The S-Pass level, you have machinists, welders, electrician, drivers, and the service level, you have the construction workers, cleaners, landscape, F&B, everyone in the dorms basically. Okay, so as you can see, this is an extremely complex community. So there was one way I could have approached this topic is to go over each group and try to explain who are the different groups of the Indians. And I think to do that will be just overwhelming and it's too much to absorb and of less value. So what I've decided to do is take a path where I highlight many less known things about the Indian connection with Singapore and Malaya over the 2000 years. Okay, and when we look at Singapore, we cannot talk just about Singapore. It's impossible because even 50 years ago, even I was born in Malaya in Singapore. Okay, Singapore is younger than me. So we cannot look at Singapore as just Singapore. It has to be part of Malaya, part of the region. Okay, just because people didn't come to Singapore Island doesn't mean they were not in Johor or in Riau, which is in the longer picture, you have to see it in that way, because Singapore was most of the time an empty island other than 2 or 3 phases where it had kingdoms here. Okay, so I will so I'll divide this into 3 parts. First is the first 1800 years, then the British period 200 years, and then I will talk about independence and the future. Okay, and because of this, I won't have time to go through a lot of detail on things, but I'll just touch the topic so that you are aware this is there. And if it piques your interest, now there's internet, Google, you can quickly Google it and find out more. Okay, now each one will be 10 minutes, but the second part is a bit tighter. If I'm running out of time, I'll go a bit faster on the second, but I'll focus more on the first and the third. Okay. Now the title is India Roots versus Roots. Okay, I love the title. It's a great one. And And it's very meaningful because the Indian roots to Singapore are recent and have been constantly changing. Even the foreign workers are coming now the last 20 years. Okay, all of us come to during the British period, 200 years. But the Indian roots, okay, of Singapore are very, very, very ancient. Okay, and okay, how do we know about the ancient past? Okay, primary resource is the Sejarah Melayu. It's called the Malay Annals. It's the official history of the Malayan kingdoms written during the Malacca Sultanate. It was first translated into English by John Leyden, who was a friend and colleague of Raffles. Okay, Raffles read the Malay Annals and then decided to look for Singapore. It's not an accident. He didn't just come here. He knew there was Temasek and there's a good place for a port here, and he came specifically looking for it because he read the Malay Annals. Okay. Now, so first let's start with the most fundamental, place names. You know, place names are very fundamental. Normally they don't change much. You know, you have a street, you know, you call it Beach Road, but now you reclaim the land 1 kilometer away from the beach, but it still remains Beach Road. Okay, people don't go and change names of places very easily. And these lock down the history of places very much. Okay, so now let's look at the key places in the Indonesian archipelago. Singapore comes from the word Simhapura, Lion City in Sanskrit. All of these are mostly Sanskrit. Okay, Malaya. Okay, one derivation is Malayur, which means mountain country in Tamil, which is the same as Malayalis. Okay, there are also a few other derivations given as well. Kedah is from the Tamil word Kedaram, which means the mountains as well. Sumatra comes from the word Samutram, which means the point that meets the ocean. So, you know, Aceh meets the Indian Ocean. So when an Indian trader came, the point that meets the ocean is Sumatra. Okay, so again, here there are a few other derivations as well. Java comes from the word Java, which is Bali. Apparently in the past, the island was famous for Bali, and it also shaped very much like a seed. Okay, Bali Island comes from Vali, the monkey king of Kishkinta in the Ramayana. Okay, and Kalimantan, which comes from the word Kalamantana, or island with a burning weather, because Kalimantan has all dense jungles. Okay, it's very hot. Okay, so you can see all the key islands. I can add on further, but I'm not going more. I'm just putting the key islands. All come from Indian derivation. Okay, now the prehistory of Singapore is, let's say, from 200 BC to about 1200 AD. From 1200 AD is the Temasek, the empire. So I'll talk of Singapore Empire. I'll talk about that later. We say 200 BC because we have Buddhist artifacts from about that time. Okay, so there might have been things before, but that we don't have any artifacts. But from about 200 BC, at least, there's Buddhist influence here. Now, I don't know how many of you have heard of the word Raja Chulan. This, in many places in Malaysia, especially the city, you'll find a Jalan Raja Chulan. Even in KL, right in the center of KL, where the Maybank building and the bus interchanges, is Raja Chulan. Okay, now Chulan comes from the word Chola. Chola is a very big, the most successful Tamil dynasty. Okay, and they invaded this part of the world in 1025. Okay. And they made a rapid succession of attacks. They destroyed 12 cities, including Temasek, and completely destroyed the Srivijayan Empire. Okay, so this Raja Chulan specifically, people think is the king who did that, who is Rajendra Chulan. Whatever it is, Chulan is the king or Chola king. Okay, so you'll find this street name. It's like the center of many Malayan cities. Now, Srivijaya, okay, it's based in Palembang, Sumatra, okay, it was a Buddhist kingdom, and the Malays originally came from there. And Temasek was an important port within the Srivijaya Empire. There were a lot of Buddhist monks passing through from China and you know, Thailand and all that. So Singapore would have been a port that some of these monks passed through. And including the Indian monks who are going to spread Buddhism, okay? Now, a very important landmark is the Singapore Stone. Okay. Now at the museum, we have a replica of that. It was there where the Singapore Merlion stands at the Singapore River. Unfortunately, the British demolished it in 1843 before it was translated. But we have certain what you call copies of it, crude copies of it. One thing for certain is written in a kind of an Indian script. It's either Sanskrit or Old Javanese written in an Indian script. By the way, all the scripts in Southeast Asia, whether Thailand, Cambodian, Old Javi, all come from Indian scripts, from Tamil, basically linked to Tamil scripts. Now, Dr. Ian Sinclair last year is the first person to really do a complete study to try to understand this stone. And he couldn't do a proper translation, but his best guess is that this stone is probably the one that's mentioned in the Sejarah Melayu, that Raja Chulan, the Rajendra Chola, asked to be put somewhere along the coast of Malaya to record all his victories. So this is about 1025. Of course, we don't know this for sure, but that's his speculation. Okay. Now, okay, this is the map of Sriwijaya. Okay, so there's a Kalimantan is here for those who don't know, which is Borneo. Java, which is like a seed. Sumatra Island joins the ocean. Malaya, Kedah is here, Singapore. Okay. Now the Chola Empire was here, Tamil Nadu, and he came in the past, and yeah, basically all the port cities here from Penang to Singapore, he attacked them. That's a Singapore stone. Okay, now next phase is Kingdom of Singapore. Okay, so now after the attacks, the Sriwijaya Empire became very weak. The Majapahits from Java started to be ascendant. So some of the princes fled Palembang, and one of them is Sang Nila Utama. Okay, he came to Bintan, then came to Singapore. You all know the story of the lion and naming of Singapore from Temasek. Now, he claims in his official history that he's a descendant of Raja Chulan. Okay, whether he is or not, what it shows is the amount of respect that the Malay kings had for the Tamil kings. Okay, that they want to be a descendant of that. Okay, now he had a palace on Fort Canning, and it was there till the early part of when Raffles arrived. The ruins were still there, and the second resident, John Crawford, actually visited, and he actually wrote down what he saw. He said there was a Hindu-Buddhist temple, ruins of a temple there. Okay, but later on they redeveloped the thing into a fort and everything, so it was all gone. We don't know anything. Now, there were 5 kings for over about 200 years, 100 years. Now, every one of them has a Sanskrit name: Sang Nila Utama, Sri Vikramavira, Sri Rana Vikrama, Sri Maharaja Parameswara. Okay, now there was a Tamil princess, Nila Panchadi, who married the second king of Singapore, okay, of Singapore Kingdom, Sri Vikramavira. Okay, and recent excavations have shown that there are a lot of Indianized artifacts on the hill as well. Okay, so you can see the strong links between India and Tamil Nadu in particular, and Singapore now specifically, Singapore, not loosely. Okay. Now, again, then Parameswara had his own enemies, both the Javanese and the Thais. So at some point he felt insecure and he fled Singapore. Parameswara is the last 5th king. Okay, he fled Singapore and he went to Malacca, and he founded Malacca as a new port city. So he had already made the Temasek was already a fairly successful port city under the kings. Okay, now he then converted to a Muslim, and he called himself Iskandar Shah. The reason is he wanted to have better trade relations with the rising Muslim kingdoms in the Arab Middle East. Okay, so the same Parameswara becomes Iskandar Shah. Then Singapore just became a fief, and it was given to the admiral of the Malaccan Navy to keep his Orang Laut Navy there. And the Malaccan Navy Commander Admiral, the name is Malay word for that is Laksamana. Okay, you all might have noticed that my name is Lakshmana. Okay, so commander, yeah, that's something, the same word. Okay, so at least 2 of the prime ministers of the Malacca Sultanate were Tamil Muslims, Tun Perak and Tun Ali. And the largest group of traders there were Gujarati and Tamil traders. And Munshi Abdullah, who was the scribe secretary for Raffles, he wrote a book of his biography, and he said there that the trading language of the Malacca port was actually Tamil. And all prominent traders would educate their sons in Tamil so that they could be successful in trade. Okay, now the Malacca kingdom comes to an end with the Portuguese. And the Portuguese basically invaded it in 1511. Okay, Portuguese are Europeans, but where did they come from? Where was their base? Where did they start their journey from? They were already established in Goa, India. That's where they raised their troops. Half the troops were probably Indian, okay? And they came and they attacked. So the base was India, even though their home is Portugal, okay? Now, later the Dutch came, okay? Now, the Dutch gained influence in Indonesia, and when they gained influence in Indonesia, what did they call all these islands? They called it the Dutch Indies, Netherlandish Indie, okay? And I will, from there, I'll go to the next slide. Okay. Okay. Now, now comes the British. Now, when Raffles wanted to look for Singapore, found a colony here, where did he go for permission? He didn't go to London. He went to Calcutta, where the headquarters of the East India Company was. Okay, India was ruled by a company, not a government. Okay, so he went there. Warren Hastings got permission from him, and he said, "Go to Penang and get all the resources you need and make the trip down." Okay, so Raffles came here. He had 120 Indian sepoy soldiers with him, and there was a what you call a bazaar contingent of camp followers, so we cooks, about 2 to 3 dozen cooks, washermen, tailors. So you had about 150 to 60 Indians who landed in Singapore with Raffles. They would probably have been 80% of the people who landed. And they cleared the Padang, they cleared Fort Canning, they cleared High Street. Okay, so the people who were here the first 6 months, the largest group were Indians. And there was, of course, a Malay, Orang Laut, and all that. Nobody knows exactly how much, but maybe equal in size, 150. Some say 1,000 all over the island, but where the Singapore River is, maybe about 150 people. So basically, though the flag, this is what I repeatedly want to point out later on as well, though the flag may be British, it could be Portuguese, but if you look underneath, who is the manpower, the the shoes on the ground, okay, is Indians, okay, because they use India as the base. The Indian sepoys are the okay. These are the most forgotten group of people in the history of Singapore. Okay, you know that no empire, no country can survive without an army. Okay, we had a stable rule for 180 years. There must have been a powerful army backing Singapore. We now have SAF. We are so afraid, Malaysia, Indonesia, confrontasi, we are whole countries an army. Okay. Now, so who was that army? It was the Indian sepoy, 1819 to 1947, 130 years. Okay. None of them lived here. They just came like out of community, in terms, they come for their tour, they go back. In the beginning, there were 500 to 700 probably. But after World War I, there were 1,000, 20, 30, 50,000, 60,000 Indian troops in Singapore. Okay. As I said, our Singaporeans are not connected to them because they are like our foreign workers. They just come and they go. They don't put their footprint here. Okay. So that's the Indian sepoy. You can see that in the Indian Heritage Center. Okay, this is the uniform change during World War I, World War II. This is during World War I in Chinatown. Now, earlier point, right? I said Dutch East Indies, and this is a very, this might surprise many people, that Singapore historically was always considered a part of India. I don't mean loosely, I mean actually a part of India. Okay, this is, I give you a few instances. When Singapore was first founded, it was under Penang. And Penang, okay, basically the British, when they wanted to rule India from Calcutta, they broke it up into 4 states. One is Madras state, one is Bombay, and one is Bengal. Which was the 4th and equal state was Penang Presidency. It's 1805. Singapore founded 1819. So for 20 years, Penang was an equal part of India. India was divided into 4 parts, and one part was Penang. Okay, they had big plans. They thought Penang will expand in Malaya and Sumatra, but of course, nothing much happened here. So then they decided this is too big a title to give to Penang, and they took it back under Bengal Presidency. So 1826 to 1867, for another 50 years, was under, it was a sub-state of Bengal. Until about 1930, as late as 1930, Malaya was referred to in all these different names in British documents. The Indian archipelago, Malayan India, further or farther India. Okay, so now the Indian archipelago, that's why you have the East Indies, the Dutch Indies, okay, the Dutch East Indies, and even in the West Indies in the Caribbean, because they thought they found India near America, right? So West Indies, so everyone was looking for India, so it just that name. And this is what I mean by place names. Today we know there's nothing to do with India and the West Indies, but we still have the place. You know, the mistake that Columbus made is still with us, because place names don't change. They really lock in history. Okay, and then I'll show you the Indian rupee was the currency of Singapore for 50 years, and the opium trade was the main trade of Singapore during the first phase of the British period. Where was all the opium coming from? From India. Where was it going to? Hong Kong. Okay, it's no wonder, because Raffles founded Singapore only to support the opium trade. That was the reason that he gave the company, we need to have a secure port to support the opium trade. But you will not find the word opium in his letters. What you will find is support the China trade. But if you go inside the numbers, what is the China trade? The China trade is all opium. Okay, so and the Singapore is the main transshipment port. Okay. And the main tax revenue of the British until 1900 was opium. Okay, so now when I say this, when I tell you the references, there's nothing more better. A picture paints the words. Okay, look at this here. This is a book. This is one of the earliest proper accounts of Singapore in detail. 1865 is by John Cameron. Our tropical possessions in Malayan India. So what does the description say? Being a descriptive account of Singapore, Penang, Malacca. Okay. So when they were thinking of India then, I mean, they literally think that this is a part of India. And this is a very important shift we must have in mind when you look at British policy and a lot of these things. Okay. Now, this is in the 1930s. He's an ex-governor of Singapore, okay, he was a governor 1910 or 1920. He wrote a book, Further India, being the story of exploration of earlier times in Burma, Malaya, Siam, and Indochina. So Singapore comes under Malaya. It's Hugh Charles Clifford. Now, this is 1873, a map, Indian archipelago and further India. Okay, so where is India? You don't see India at all. India is on this side here, right? India is here. So the archipelago is everything. Further India is Burma, Thailand, and all of this. And as a fact, Burma itself, which comes up to here, almost Malaysia, was actually a part of Bengal province until 1937. So all Burmese were actually Indians until 1937. That's when they split Burma into a different colony. Okay, so so as the first official currency in Singapore was the Indian rupee. Okay, so this is the East India Company's rupee. This was but it was not a popular currency. They preferred the Mexican dollar and everything, but nevertheless, officially this was the currency. Now, this is a currency that came later. The first note printed in Singapore was in 1892. You know, those days, governments don't print the notes, especially in the colonies. If you all are some of the older ones, you remember Hong Kong. We went to Hong Kong before China came in. The Hong Kong dollar note will say printed by Standard Chartered Bank or HSBC. Okay, it will say Hong Kong dollar, but then you'll have the bank name. This is a similar concept. This is by the Oriental Bank. So this was the first note printed for Singapore. So Singapore. And one thing you would find it interesting on the left here in blue is the word is written in Tamil, $1,000 in Tamil. Okay, so that shows that the Tamils were also important in trade at that time. Okay? So opium from India, as I told, I will not go through the detail. Basically, the takeaway is that the main trade through Singapore port was opium. Okay, and the opium came from India. Okay, so now I have I've completed. Okay, now when this part I have to, I'm a bit behind on time, so I need to skip through a bit. Okay, there were a few main groups of people who came. One was the Tamil Muslims. They were all traders. Okay, and in the very first 5 to 10 years of Singapore, their role was very important. Okay, and you can see this when Raffles, before he left Singapore, he fired Farquhar. he appointed Crawford, and he said one of the things in his instruction letter is you must get the Tamil Muslims to come here because they got so much trade. Okay, so this is his quote. Piracy, for example, is so frequent in the Straits of Malacca between Malacca and Penang that the square-rigged vessels of the Chulias or natives of the Coromandel Coast, the Timid people, are on this account precluded from coming further than Penang and Achin. And thus trade of 50 or 60 brigs. Brigs are the huge British ships with the masts. And ships are in great measure lost to Singapore. You know, I don't think there were that many ships at all in Singapore at that time, the first year, second year. Okay, so the very earliest traders were the largest group was the Tamil Muslims. Okay, so that's a Tamil Muslim trader. Those are Tamil Muslims. They traded spice and cloth. Okay, then they also did other things. You know, they were boatmen, horse carriage drivers, and ox cart drivers. The oldest unaltered brick building in Singapore is the Nagore Dargah from 1830. Okay, so there's the Nagore Dargah. Okay, all other buildings in Singapore are built after them. There's a boatman. The Singapore River, you can see there was, you know, the Tongkang, our time, we remember the Chinese, but before that, originally was a Tamil Muslim. Horse carriage drivers, you can see all the taxis, basically taxis, okay, ox carts. Okay, the other important group is the government servants. The East India Company definitely has all the servants, right, government? They're all called Dubash, and they have this uniform with this. Now, you look at all the old paintings. Fort Canning, there's some, probably the Malay Sultan with meeting the governor or something. Who are all the assistants? Can you see? All these with the sash and the turban. These are all the Dubash, the Indian Dubash. Okay, here again, you look at on top of Fort Canning, the Indian Dubash, the Indian Sepoy, the Indian ox cart. Because the British came from India, so of course all their servants are all Indians because they already trained them, so they just bring them along. Okay. The other really interesting community is Parsi. I don't have much time to go through them. They were very small in number, not more than 100, but they were very important at the beginning because among all the Indians, they were the ones considered equal to the British, and they were doing a lot of things that the British were doing. All the others were not allowed to do. So one example is John Little, the first partner who founded it was Kersat G. It was actually called Little and Kersat G. The Tanjong Pagar Dock Company, the founders, some of the founders were Parsis. HSBC as well. And of some interest is there was this man called Bairamji Kama who set up a free school for Chinese orphan children, okay, to teach them English medium. And the principal was an Indian. And Hirji Kaka actually ran a Chinese newspaper because the Parsis are very philanthropic. So they felt that this was the way they could contribute to Singapore. And Mystery Wing, you know, Singapore General Hospital is founded a big, he donated that wing. Okay, these are the Parsis, but I said there are very few numbers. Okay, there's two roads, Pastry Mystery Road. Convicts, okay, we are all very familiar in this because our history books tend to highlight this more than anything else. So these convicts basically came here because Singapore had no labor to do anything. You know, 1824 landed in an empty island. The Malays were orang laut fishermen who will do the construction. So they got all the convicts who are free labor because Singapore got no money. You know, new colony, you have to pay, you cannot pay, so you can't hire workers. So you took the convicts. So there were between 500 to 2,000 of them at any time. So they built all the main roads. They built Istana, Parliament House. It was a mix. Some of them were hardcore criminals, murderers, and so on. Others were political criminals. They were opposed to the British. Okay. Again, these people like the sepoys have very little connection to Singaporeans because they were not released here. Who will want the murderer to be released in Singapore? Will the British wives will want all these murderers running around? No, right? So after the convict term is over, they bring them back to India and release them. Some of those with good service, maybe got reference, they come back as get a job here. Okay, so they are also out of the census. So these are the convicts. Okay, the convict prison is where the SMU is now. So right now, you know, opposite SGI, this is a place. Okay, that's inside the camp. You can see Fort Canning on top. They took the photo from inside. Okay, so there's not a convict gang, but they would have been working like this. Okay. Make the drains. Okay, they built the Istana. This is actually the convict gangs. You can see the Dubash as well. Istana completed. Okay, so now we come to the Crown Colony. Is when Singapore became they split from India because they felt India was not taking care of Singapore's trading interests. So they appealed and they split India from Singapore and a straight settlement, and it came directly under London, so no longer a part of India. Now, this I'm really out of time, so I need to skip, but I'll just say two things. One is that the first Little India was not Tekka. Tekka was never a Little India. It's actually a Chinese area. That's why it's called Tekka, Hokkien name. The first Little India is actually Raffles Place. It's a street, you all know Chulia Street, right next to Battery Road. What is Chulia? The same as the Raja Chulan. It means Chola. The Tamil Muslims who traders were there. And Market Street was where the Chettiars were. These two streets was the first Little India of Singapore, because Indians, when they first came, were primarily traders. If not, they were those boatmen and all those Tamil Muslims. So the traders stayed at Raffles Place, okay, or next to the first street. So this is all the old signboards from Chulia Street. By the way, I grew up in Market Street. So Raffles Place was where I used to play football in the evenings, you know. Okay, and everybody, Mustafa, Juma Boys, Scott's Trading, Second Chance, everyone started there. That's Market Street. This is all in the school textbooks. I took this out from the school textbook. Market Street, Chettiar. Okay, and the second, first Little India for the laboring class was where Chinatown is now. Okay, why you have the Indian temple and the mosque in the middle of Chinatown? I don't think Chinese were praying there. It was because that was the Little India. Then later on, Chinatown expanded and took over the place. Okay, so, and all the street names, right? This is the Masjid Chulia. It was built in 1835. Mosque Street shows that the mosque was the first thing there. Okay, this is Mariamman Temple. Pagoda Street, Temple Street shows that was what was there first before the Chinese moved in. Okay. Then the other big group is the Chettiars. Okay, the Chettiars are basically they were bankers. Okay, and I'll just say one line about them. Why they were the bankers is because people ask, what are the banks doing? Okay, firstly, there were no banks, and when there were banks, these British banks are called Merchant and Exchange Bank. They are supporting trade, export, import. They are not here to lend to the local guy, find out what this Chinese entrepreneur want to do or what this Malay guy want to do. They don't know the language. It's not their job. It's not even in their rules to lend money. So they were not lending to the local. So there was nobody else lending to the locals, so Chettiars. So everyone who's an entrepreneur in Singapore, if he ever borrowed money outside his family circle, it would 100% have been with the Chettiar. Okay. So all our famous names like Tan Kah Kee, Lok Wan Tho of Cathay, Yap Oloy, who founded KL and the tin mining, P. Govindasamy Pillai, and including Lee Kuan Yew's father, you know, after the World War II, borrowed money from the Chettiars, because it's nothing. That's where you go, you know, to borrow money. We all borrow money, right? So we go there. Okay. So there's a statue there. There's a Chettiar. This is a Chettiar thing. This, by the way, is my great grandfather. I'm a Chettiar, happen to be. Okay. Then the other big group is the Sikh policemen. They came here in the 1880s. They came to Singapore, was overrun by the secret societies, almost ungovernable. So they brought the Sikh police and they were established in Chinatown, Pearl's Hill. That's why they are there. Okay, some of them work as security guards. Okay, you know, these Jagas are there. The really big group is the Ceylon Tamils. Okay, these people were the civil servants. Okay, they came first to do the railways. And then they came from Sri Lanka. They were the educated people. The British took all the educated people from Sri Lanka, not from India. So they were the engineers, the doctors, the dressers, the lawyers. Okay. So in every British department, the British should be number one man. Number two is Eurasian if they have. And number three will be a Sri Lankan Tamil. The Eurasians, of course, preferred because they are half white, right? However, they were a very small community, so not enough labor supply. So the Sri Lankans supplemented them. They played a very important role at the time of independence. Why did they? So now at the time of independence, there was what's called Malayanization. In the 1950s, they said you have to train locals British before you get out. So all the British top guys, PERMSEC, top level people, they all left, vacated their positions, and they brought locals up. So who are these locals who could fill the position? It was the Eurasian number two or the Sri Lankan who was a number two or a number three. Okay, so they took over the entire civil service in 1965. When independence came, the entire civil service was manned by Eurasians as well as Sri Lankans. And during that phase, 5 to 10 years, when there was very little talent and we were insecure, the Sri Lankan Tamils and the Eurasians were the critical skill, the efficient policies of the PAP couldn't have been rolled out if we didn't have an equally efficient civil servant. Okay, and it's incredible that this community that was very advanced in Singapore, and they could have gone anywhere in the world. Everyone was leaving. Once the British left, the Jews left, the Arabs left, the Armenians left, even the Malayalis who are educated community left, but the Sri Lankan Tamils decided to stay in Singapore. Okay, and none other than Mr. Lee has recognized this, and you can see this quote. Okay, this is what he has said about the Ceylon Tamils. A whole generation of Singaporeans take their present standard of living for granted because you had laid the foundations of the economy of modern Singapore. Okay. So some of the people as Rajaratnam, JYM Pillay, and up to today, Dharman Shanmuratnam, and now the CEO of Temasek, Dilan Pillay, they are these people. Okay. Now I have to, and they were made a lot of the educated, they were a lot of the judges. Okay. So I'm now going to jump. Okay. I have to go to where I need to go. Okay. There were other, I don't want to leave out the labor classes who came later, like for construction, rubber plantations, mainly in Malaya, and those who load and unload ships. Okay, and of course the construction PWD. After the convicts, they recruited workers. Okay, rubber plantation. Okay, and Indians settle in many places, not just in Tekka. Today we think it's just Tekka. Wherever they had a job, they settled down, including the rubber plantations in Yishun. Okay, now this is where I want to focus and end off. I know I'm short of time. Okay, now in World War II, the reverse thing happened. We said always India was Singapore and Malaya was a part of India. We had a curious situation where the opposite happened. Okay, now in World War II, the Japanese, they captured 87,000 British soldiers. But how British were these soldiers? 67% were Indians, 58,000. Okay, out of the 58,000, 60% were Sikh, the Bai turban wearing, as you can see in the photo. So 35,000 were Sikhs. Okay, the Caucasians were interred in the Changi prison. The Indians were sent to River Kwai. So the Japanese didn't want to waste these Indians, because they are not their real enemy, right? It's the whites. So they made a deal with Subhash Chandra Bose, one of the Indian leaders, freedom fighters, and he came to Singapore and he took command of all these troops. This is in the Padang. Okay, so can you imagine 58,000 troops in the Padang, Indian troops. Okay, and they had a female wing volunteers, the Jhansi Regiment. Okay, so he took command of them, and he founded the first provisional government of India. Okay, he declared independence. He called it Free India. It was declared in the Cathay building. This is the Cathay building. So Singapore became the capital for India for 2 years, at least as far as Subhash Chandra Bose was concerned. Okay. Okay. Now after that, Indians and politics. This is a very interesting as well. After World War II, 1948, we had our first elections. Until then, people couldn't vote. Okay. So hello. Okay, never mind. I thought it might be you. Okay, sorry. The 45% of vote. Now, believe it or not, 45% of voters in Singapore in the 1948 election were Indians. Okay. The trade unions, most of them were also led by Indians. Okay, and Tanjung. Okay, why? Okay, why? Let me first explain why the Indians are 45% of the vote. Okay, it's because you had to be a British subject. You had to be a British subject to vote, and only Indians mostly were British subjects because they were born in India, which is part of the Britain. But the Peranakan Chinese were British, the Malays were British, but most of the Chinese in Singapore, they were all new immigrants. Okay, they were not British subjects. They could not vote. These are the ones that joined the communists and led by Chin Siong because they were disenfranchised. Okay, so, and this is a comment again, Mr. Lee has observed this. Okay, this is what he's put in his Singapore story book. at the previous Legislative Council polls in 1948, only 23,000 out of the potential of 200,000 had voted, and nearly half of those who voted had been Indians, although their community consisted no more than 6% of the population. Not unnaturally, there was a disproportionate number of Indians among these standing for election in 1951. 15 of them were Indians out of 22, okay, okay, contesting 9 seats. And you can see this is the statistics table. Indians, 1948, 45%. Chinese were only 25% of the electorate. Okay. Now, and this is why Lee Kuan Yew, when he went for elections, he chose Tanjong Pagar. At that time, the largest Indian population place was Tanjong Pagar, not Tekka, not Market Street. Market Street had Indians still there, but they were only traders, a small community. But what I call the Chinatown, where the port area became a Indian residential area. Indians are the largest group there, or maybe even the majority. So Lee Kuan Yew chose to run in Tanjong Pagar because he was supported by the Indians, because he helped all the unions, which were primarily run by Indians. Okay. He could have stood in any constituency in Singapore. He was the leader of the PAP. He only went to the one with the largest number. And Devan Nair actually stood in Tekka and he lost the election because Tekka was primarily a Chinese area. Okay. So at that time, Lee did not have much support with the Chinese, you know, right? The communists and all those people were, and he didn't speak Hokkien, he didn't speak Mandarin, and the Baba Chinese were not very well liked by the the lay people, because they were looked down on them. So many reasons, so he thinks through everything. This is the reason. Okay. And now he said that in the 1945, when I fought my first election in 1945, I chose Tanjong Pagar because that was where the postmen were based, and also the dock workers. What he's indirectly saying is the dock workers, all these people are all Indians, Indian unions. Okay. So I'll skip through these slides. Okay. There's campaigning, and that's why you see a lot of Indians in the photographs in his first election. Okay, now the last part, post-independence. Now, many Indians returned back to India in 1965. Unlike Chinese, couldn't go back to communist China. Indians, and there was a big drop in the population. And then from the late 80s, it started to pick up again. Then 85, you have the construction workers. 1990s, the IT professionals, bankers. 2000s, you have the banker and scientists, and now you have SECA. Okay, now here are key summaries. Okay, there are key points on Indian. Firstly, they're very different from Chinese and Malays because they were traveling in the British Empire. Early days, you don't need passport. You just hop on a ship and come, just like you're going within your own country. They were British subjects, so always they had rights. Okay, that's why you don't have secret society protect them. Whereas the Chinese, they arrive, they need someone to look after them. Okay, they could vote in local elections if they are educated. There were some rules, but if you are Indian, you qualify. Okay, and they didn't just hop on a ship and come over. Usually there were labor drives. The British would say, we're going to build a road. We need 1,000 workers. So they'll go to India, they advertise, come for construction. Or they say, we need policemen. They'll go to Punjab and say, we need policemen. So these were all under, they already had a job before arriving. Again, very different from the Chinese, who almost like a refugee, because of instability in China. Okay, the first place, again, the British would know anything they need, specialized service, would be India, because everybody is trained there. They just need to second over. They say, hey, send me a good clerk lah. They write to their friend in Calcutta and they'll send a good clerk. Okay, and that's why, even though they were a very small part of the population, they were very diverse. They did everything. Okay, all the way from, as I said, so Indians together, Eurasians were small in number but played critical roles with specialized skills that enable the colony to function properly. Okay, they manned the entire civil service. So everything from a convict to PERMSEC, they were Indians. The professions were heavily dependent on them. Engineer. The reason is because Singapore had no university until 1949. Okay, so if you have no university, how can you get an education? No Malaya, Hong Kong, nowhere. If you want an educated person, you have to go to India. Eurasians, where did they go to study? Either they went to England or they went to India universities. Okay, so the exception was medicine, 1905, where the King Edward College. So there was already some local doctors. Otherwise, any knowledge profession, you have to either study in India or you take from India or Sri Lanka. Okay. And the third most important thing is the Chettiars finance the entire, both Singapore and Malaya, tin industry, rubber, entire SME development, was dependent on their lending. Okay. And Indians were not so big on trade, but within the sub-segment of spice and textiles, the Muslims were very important. Okay. Now, this is my last slide. Now, this is the part that I want to highlight is that if you look 200 BC, India was a Buddhist country. It was not a Hindu country. And so Malaya was a Buddhist country. 800 AD onwards, India became Hindu. So later on, Majapahit, 1000 AD, India becomes Hindu. 1200, India is a Muslim, conquered by the Muslims, ruled by Muslims. So Malaya also becomes Muslims. Iskandar Shah, why does he convert? Because all the traders are now Indian Muslim traders. 1500, Portuguese come, but where do they come from? They come from India as a base. 1800, the British come, but where do they come from? They come from India as a base. So you see this geopolitical relationship between India and Southeast Asia. 2000 years, no matter who conquers, India is ruled by others, not ruled by others. There is some geopolitical connection between these two things that means any winds of change in India eventually becomes a winds of change in Southeast Asia. Okay, and every winds of this change, I mean, we don't have a lot of clear historical data, exact data, but common sense says where there's smoke, there's fire. Okay, so all this could not have happened with a large inflow of people from India, ideas and goods. Okay, and that includes Singapore. So when Singapore was a place to come to, like when it was Temasek or when it was the Singapore Kingdom or under the British, surely the Indians would have passed through Singapore. But when it was an empty island, naturally they would not have passed through Singapore because there's nothing here. Okay, and I want to finally end off by saying now, this brings us to SECA. You see, this phenomenon is continuous to today. What's the problem with? We have no problems with the laboring classes from India doing all the laboring jobs, but we have a problem with the knowledge people because they are threatening our middle class jobs. But isn't this the same pattern that has been going on always, that when you want knowledge workers somewhere, somehow or other, the supply ends up to be from India? So this needs to be taken in mind when we look at these things as we fine tune our policies, that some of these may have much longer undercurrents, and we need to understand them better so that we can manage them. Of course, we must have our jobs. We Singaporeans, we must have our jobs. But when we look at all these issues, we should look at it on a larger historical perspective to give more insight. This is what I would try to say for the future. So I know I've overrun my time a little bit, but thank you for your patience.
Wow. Okay. Thank you, KK Lee. I would like to give my credit to Yao King and Ramachandran to allow me to be a live member of this GSS. And I'll talk about GSS at the end of my presentation. And a follow-up of what Subaya mentioned, mine will be a link, a small link there under Tanjong Pagar, which I will explain, because the postal member is part of my presentation as well. So I will explain that later. I've got lots of information here. I'm going into more micro level. Subaya did the macro, but I'm going into the micro level of family that came in during that time in the early 1990s. So I'll take family through time from early 1990s till to now. Okay, next. Story is a story about family and a family linking with me. The next one, and linking with me in terms of it's a collection of memos that traces the family history. It builds to understand the growth of Indian communities in Singapore through where we see it, and our family contribution to the Indian community, and appreciating the Indian culture by sharing with the non-Indians, and how the multicultural, multi-religion, and multi-race have evolved over the years. Next. And just little bit of just a very short 2-minute video on the Indians in Singapore and how they came, and then I'll bring into a micro level,
home to the biodiversity.
Real micro level. Yeah.
This is South India, home to the biodiversity hotspots, the Western and Eastern Ghats, the Bengal tiger, the Nilgiri tar, the Indian elephant, and whatever this creature is. Here is also the cradle of Tamil culture. Today there are about 80 million Tamils in the world. That's more than there are French, Colombians, or Kenyans. Most Tamils live in North and East Sri Lanka or in the southern Indian state of Tamil Nadu, literally Tamil country. Tamil Nadu is now a state in modern India, but for thousands of years Tamilakam, or the homeland of the Tamils, was much larger and ruled by independent kingdoms. Tamil culture is the last surviving classical civilization because they've managed to keep their beliefs, culture and language intact for over 2,000 years. But who are the Tamils? From the 19th century onwards, they went as indentured labourers across the British Empire, especially to Malaysia, Singapore, South Africa, Fiji, Mauritius and the Caribbean, where many have kept their Tamil identities. Tamil is actually an official language in Singapore and Malaysia.
So that brings us to Singapore. So I'm going to talk about 5 connected families next, and these 5 connected families, how they are linked with me. I don't know whether you can see the slides. Starting with me and moving upwards from my father and through my mother, and through my mother's sister, moving up to P. Goindasamy, who was the MP for Anson. And that's how that he then was helping Lee Kuan Yew in Tanjong Pagar and Anson. And he was from the postal, he was inspector of post. And he was looking after the Indians in those 2 areas. And this a natural link when with Subbaiah's finished in terms of Tanjong Pagar and the Indian and the postal workers. Then moving on the right hand side is my wife's side. My wife's side has got a more interesting thing as well. My mother-in-law's father is Subbaiah, and they came from India as well. And they are he's the founder of the charity here for the last 56 years, which is the Call Krishna, our guide, and basically teaching Indian way of life to all the kids for the last 56 years every Sunday, and still going on until today. Moving and Subbaiah is basically is a father of S. Dhanabalan as well, who's contributed a lot to our community. Moving to the right is Gunaratnam, which is my mother-in-law's mother, and Ranganathan Naidu has got another interesting history. He come from Hyderabad. From Hyderabad, they moved on to Durban, working in the sugar farm for 10 years, and then coming back to India, and then back again to Singapore, and all the children that he had, all of them were born in Singapore. So he stayed 10 years in Durban. And my mother-in-law's mother actually was born in Durban, and they moved from there. So these are the roots that I'm trying to link together. And you notice that they all come from different towns in India: Mangalampettai, Cholai, Srivilliputtur, Chennai, and Hyderabad as well. And one level that I will talk later is also that each one of the families in India, they call it, they have the family deity, which call it Kuladevam. Subbaiah would know this as well. So each one of them has their Kuladevam in their own village. So as far as Mangalampettai, Srivilliputtur, they've identified the Kuladevam, but under the Parthasarathi Naidu, the Arumugam and Ranganathan, until now that route still not been identified yet. So I'm doing some work on that before the book is finished. Next is so these are the these are the 5 connected families. I'll go through very briefly one by one, and then I'll do the summary. Moira, the next. Okay, these are the 5 the 5 families I'll go through, which will be in the book as well, and trying to reach out to the ancestors and where they come from. And each one came from different direction and different dimension and settled in different place, and how they congregated together. And I'll bring it to the present day as well. Next. We'll start with Parthasarathi Naidu first, which is actually my grandfather. He arrived in Singapore in 1920 and worked with the Singapore. They call it the Singapore printing office as a foreman, working with the British and the Japanese. I remember my mother used to say that when they came early days, they stayed near Bilalios Lane behind the Veera Kaliamman temple. And apparently my mother was born there as well. And she remembers that when she was born, they brought her to the temple to give her the naming ceremony. And her sister was also born here in 1925. My mother was born in 1929. My grandfather was born in 1890, and my grandmother was born in 1896. Both of them were born in India, and they got married in 1912, and then they came to Singapore in 1920. And these are their siblings and the children and the grandchildren. You know, the next. And this will show a quick photo of them, and more photos will be in the book as well. You know, the next. And they went through. The family went through the World War I and World War II, and during their time. I mean, I'm trying to bring the community at heart. They even adopted children during the early days as well, in terms of giving more opportunities to needy people in the community, even at early stage. Next, I'll move to P. Govindasamy. P. Govindasamy had a very interesting background as well. He came, the next one, Moira. He came from a place in India called Mangalampettai, and they arrived in Singapore in they left India in 1923 by boat to Penang, and stayed 2 weeks in Penang, and then came to Singapore. And the point that most of the Indians stay is at Racecourse Road and Cuff Road at that time. I think most of the Indians congregate there. And he came with his mother and his brother. And the mother, she was a single mother and very enterprising. And she was selling muruku and vade, making a living. And P. Govindasamy was a young boy at that time, working in different place. And in 1933, he got a job at the Traction Company. And 1935, he joined the Post. They call it the Singapore Post at that time. He was born in 1908 in India, and came here in 1923. And then I'll go through these details a bit later. Next. You can see a photograph of him. Okay, carry on. A short video. You recognize this?
December 8, 1965. soldiers lined St Andrews Road for the arrival of the head of state. It was the opening of Singapore's first parliament. It was only 2 years before that Singapore joined Malaysia, but the hopes and aspirations which had accompanied the island's entry into the Federation were short-lived. The attempt at merger had failed. The central government at Kuala Lumpur and the Singapore government had profound differences in their political beliefs. In the end, the only alternative, in order to avoid political and racial strife, was for Singapore to leave the Federation. And on the morning of December the 8th, PAP assemblymen and cabinet ministers made their way to Assembly House to map out a new future for an independent Singapore. Separation from Malaysia also meant that legislative assemblymen who were elected in the 1963 general elections had become Singapore's
So the person that you see there in the first parliament there is P. Govindasamy, who was my uncle. And he at the time he was retired as inspector of post, the highest post in a uniform group. He was the chairman of the Indo Endowment Board. He was advisor in Tanjong Pagar, and this linked with Subaya's command that Tanjong Pagar has lots of Indians, and he's got involved in lots of Indian community projects, fundraising projects. And he also had the same thing in terms of community at the heart, adopting few children. And even at that stage, he adopted three children, and to bring them as their own kid. So I'm just, the common thread is the community at the heart that I'm trying to emphasize. The next we'll move to Mr. Supaya's family. Supaya was born in 1908. He was born in Singapore, and they came in into Singapore in early 1990s. The father, I think he came in about 1908, 07 at that time. His father died at 1912 when he was a young boy. And here again, the mother, as a single mother, brought him up, and he worked very hard throughout the years. I'll be writing more details about this in the book as well. So if you look at the chart, then you can see Dhanabalan there, who is his son. Next, I'll show you a photograph of him, and he actually was conscripted to work at the Burma Rail, and as you know, that those days most people go to the Burma Dead Rail, never came back. He was one of the lucky ones who escaped from there and came alive. He was the founder of the Krishna, our guide group, and he's a great leader and a great inspirational person. And he had a very innovative idea of developing the young minds, and that is still going on till today. Next one, Myra. Okay, and we talked about it, and there's a photograph of him and his family at the early years. The next we'll talk about is Ramasamy. Next one, Ramasamy Naidu, which is my father. And my father came from a village in Srivilliputturu, and he was born in 1904 and married to my mother, was born in 1929, not 28, it's 29. And we have tracked down their family for a few years, and we've also tracked down their family deity as well in a place called Srivilliputturu. I visited the place, and I visited, and we also now build the temple as well. We spent a lot of money building the temple, the family deity temple, which I'll show in the book as well. How he came in. The next one, he came into Singapore in 1930, and he had a great entrepreneurial spirit. He was a building contractor. I think Supaya mentioned that some of them came in as contractors. And he managed two transportation companies. and he was very supportive to his brothers and sisters in India, and helped and sent a lot of money there to help them build their farm and develop their business there as well. Next one, Moira. And even before he was married, he adopted and supported a lot of families while he was a bachelor. And even after getting married, he adopted 4 other children in addition to his own children. He had five of us plus 4. We had about nine in the family. The next one. The next is about Ranganathan Naidu, which I spoke about. He's the one who came from Durban from India, went to Durban, and from Durban to India, and then back to Singapore, which I've spoken about him already. Next is how the question that I wanted to answer is racial integration. How this racial integration began. I think this began in the early 60s. As you may know, that within the Indian community there are castes, and within the caste there are subcastes. And these all have to be integrated together, and maybe some of the things need to be dissolved. So within each caste, even within the Naidus and within the Telugus, there are many. Actually, we are Telugus as well. So within the Telugus, there are many sub-castes as well. So because the Singapore community is very small at the time of the Indian community. Next one, Moira. So all these subcastes has to be merged together. So then there was also in terms of disintegration between castes, and that disappeared. And then moving further line is in terms of interracial integration as well. There's marriage between Indian and the Chinese, and the different races, and thus the new group of Chindian evolved fairly fast as early as 1960s. And this has happened in our family group, which I'll reflect more in the book. And as all my uncles and my nephews and all of them have got married to the Chinese, and the Chindian community is quite large in our group. And Moira here, who is also a Chindian, for your information. Next, in the cultural integration. So as you know, that as you merge together, there are different cultures coming in together. Even between the Indians, there are different culture between the Indian subgroups, and also between the Indian, Chinese, and Malay. There's a different culture. With this racial integration, there's also cultural integration has taken place since the 1960s. And this is where that I can see from our family side. There's lots of resistance initially, but I think there were a lot of tolerance later on. That leads me to in terms of religious tolerance. Next one, Moira. Religious tolerance, and in terms of different, because once you get mixed with the different races and different categories, there's also in terms of religious tolerance. And I've seen within our family that some of them are Christians, and some in some family, all of them became Christians. In some families, some husband is a Christian and the wife is still Hindu, and likewise they coexist and live together without forcing each other their own practices. And the practices also have been merged in terms of Chinese and Indian. But surprisingly, the Chinese and the Indian, some of the practices are a bit similar, because they follow the moon system, and the prayers and all those things. There's some resemblance there, and because of that loss of tolerance. Even my brother married to a Chinese, but very, very tolerant in terms of understanding. My uncle also married to a Chinese, and she's totally on the Hindu side. I mean these are the tolerance that we've seen. Next is the community integration in terms of how do we help the different community, and all the different families that I know are one way or another involved in community health and community work, and they've adopted kids, and which I'll reflect more in lots of community work being done by all these different families and different people coming together. That brings me to my next point is the book that we're writing is Community at the Heart, which the focal point is I'm starting with my mother as a focal point, And the book, the proposal, the book has got. I proposed that this book will be about 300-page book with documentaries, with photographs, and and first of all, I'm going to take this book through childhood, girlhood to womanhood, and her experience in the World War II, her married life. She became widow very early, and her motherhood, how she took care of her husband, and life as a widow, and that's a quite extensive one in terms of the long period she stayed as a life as a widow, and the later years, and what did she contribute, and what legacy is moving on, and what's the movement from now onwards. So I'll start with this, and then I will then elaborate on all the other family members. With that, thank you very much. This is my very quick presentation. It's I hope I'm within the time. And I would like to also now at this point trying to introduce Genealogy Society. And I'm very grateful for Yau Keng and KK Lee and Ramachandran to introduce me to them. I think they provide a forum for genealogy enthusiasts and generate interest in genealogy within the multiracial society in Singapore. And they have a collaboration with different government agency, academic individuals, and civil society. And their details is available here, and I would urge members to become member of this genealogical society, and if possible to contribute wherever possible in this society. Thank you very much.